welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
This is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and we are thrilled to be hosting our guest today. Please tell everybody who you are.
I'm Alma Katsu. I've written 5 historical, horror, supernatural kind of novels and 1 spy novel.
I think the spy novel is your most recent one, and I know what you're coming up with next. And I hope that you put a tab on your calendar that we want to talk to you about that one when that comes out, because I'm excited about that as well. Your spy novel, Red Widow, was a bit of a departure, although it was still a heart-pounding ride through something that is very tangible because it is based in reality. And that's one thing that I love about so much of your horror. You know, you have the deep, which is the Titanic, and the Hunger. And I think there's so much horror in things that happen in real life, and you have like a tap right into it. But Red Widow is very different in the sense that it follows, it is a spy novel. Tell us a little bit about how you began writing this and if you found it very different in the writing process.
So I realize it probably seems almost like a whipsaw sort of change for a writer to do, but it'll make more sense when I tell you that I've actually worked in intelligence for over 30 years. I've had a career in intelligence. I worked for CIA and NSA and was in the West Wing of the White House and all this kind of fun stuff. I had a great career, and I'd always thought that I should be writing a spy novel. But for one reason or another, I got started in this other vein, writing this other sort of genre. And it is hard to switch genres once, your publisher, this is sort of on the business side of things. Publishers want you to sort of establish yourself. And once you start building a following, they're a little reluctant to have you jump over to another genre. But my publisher really understood that this was something I wanted to try. And I think she was keen too, to see if I could write a spy novel. So so I really lucked out, and I've been really pleased with Red Widow. It's gotten a great reception, a lot of great reviews, and probably the most heartening part is that I've gotten so many comments from former CIA folks saying that they feel like it's just the most true to life depiction of what the job's really like.
Yeah, I actually noticed that you had a background in intelligence when I was doing some research on you. So I'm glad that you were the one to bring that up and not myself. But it really is, it is amazing to me because this type of story makes for such cinematic, like media and storytelling, and you think to yourself, there's no way that there's anything even close to reality in this. But sometimes, as you've shown in horror, reality can be quite crazy as well. Did you have a lot of trouble finding story that you could use and not trying to tap into some things that you'd experienced too much to give too much away, if that makes sense?
It does make sense. So when I talked to my editor about this, I knew right away the sort of thing that would be the kernel for the story. So the book is actually based on something that really happened. It's not close to that in the details because that wouldn't make them very happy. But the betrayal at the heart of it is very close to what actually happened. And it's very shocking, I think, for people who aren't in the business to realize that this kind of thing goes on, So, it's not a problem coming up with ideas. The problem is deciding which ones to settle on. And then the other thing is there's so much political intrigue going on today. Things, we really are living in an incredible age of more and more espionage, whether it's what we're used to, which is intelligent government, national level intelligence agencies. It's getting a lot more personal. I mean, it's spreading into corporate life, it's spreading into personal life, and more people, I think, end up having this interest in what spycraft is and what it's like. So it was really rewarding to write a book that I thought, could kind of, it's not really like your traditional spy novel. It's not heavy on the geopolitical side of things. It's more about the personal, what it means to you as a person to have this life of in intelligence, where you're kind of always on two sides of something. So, and the other thing was I really wanted to write a spy novel that spoke to the role of women, what it's like to be a woman working as an intelligence professional today, because you don't really see us well represented in pop culture, whether it's movies or books or television. And that's been real heartening too. The two main characters in the book are both women, and I think they're really deep, multi-dimensional characters. And so if people are kind of interested in what a woman intelligence officer is really like and how she thinks and how she works, I think they might find the book interesting.
And what I really liked, because you talk about the human aspect of it, Lindsay, the main character, it's not a surprise to say that she thinks she's at the end of her career with the CIA, because it is literally in the description of the book. But the book speaks very much to the trauma of having to be the keeper of secrets and the keeper of safety, and dealing with people who you're supposed to be protecting, but at the same time that comes from what they can give you back. And I thought that there's just so much in this book, it's so twisty, that I just loved it. And there's definitely a reason why we had multiple copies on hold on our shelves all the time when this book came out.
Oh, that's so great to hear. That's so great to hear, that it's resonating. I'm really hoping that women audiences find it too, because as women aren't the biggest readers mostly of, traditional spy fiction. And so I'm hoping this sort of scratches that itch for women who like The Americans or Homeland or things like that, that they might find this is sort of, up their alley. It's interesting, most people who work in intelligence do end up like having a full career, right? It's not something that you come in as a mid-careerist from another business or something. That's changing a little, and so when you grow up in it, it seems perfectly normal to you. All of the requirements and restrictions and the fact that you can't really tell anybody about what you're doing, or, so on one hand, it wasn't until I kind of was on my way out that I realized what a peculiar relationship people in intelligence have to their jobs, and also what sort of additional demands end up getting put on you. But then after the book came out and I started talking to people from other, who come from other employment, especially, I find out that it's not so different, right? I guess every job has its demands on your life, and your loyalties and that sort of thing. It just might be that the stakes are a little different. So, you had mentioned how cinematic the book is. We are making a TV series out of the book. Yeah. So I've been working with Fox. Yeah. And they're the ones who brought it up at first. It's like, this all sounds so twisty and devious and horrible, but it's nothing like the TV business. The TV business apparently is really cutthroat.
Yeah, so from what I've heard, the TV business could give Game of Thrones a run for its money.
Yeah, it's really, I'm getting into this late at life. I don't really need any more intrigues, but it's been interesting learning a different business, especially one as complicated as this.
So question, as somebody with your background, are there any other visual media or TV shows that you think do a good job of speaking to this experience, or is it all like bubbles and glitz?
Well, I'm really learning because the whole reason I wanted to stay involved in the production was to sort of learn more about how Hollywood does storytelling, because how they look at a story and how much drama and conflict needs to be in there is so different from a novel. So I was kind of hoping that I might be able to learn a few things that I could apply then to storytelling. And now I understand why a lot of TV and that sort of thing are not as true to life as you can be in a book. A lot of folks who work in the field aren't big fans, really. If you ask them on the side, they're not big fans of movies and TV about the spy business, because they're pretty unrealistic. But now as a writer, and I mean, looking at it as a producer and talking to writers, I understand why it's so dramatic and that sort of thing. So there's not too many that I think are super true to life. The Americans was very good, that TV series. And Joe Weisberg, the showrunner, had actually worked at CIA for 3 years. He went through the clandestine training program. And so you do get a lot of that, that truth in the operations and that sort of thing. A lot of the other ones have their moments of truth, right?
Let's go back to your historical horror, because I don't want to talk too much about it, but I know what your next book is about. And I'm very excited to read it, because it's one of those periods of time that are quite horrific without adding any kind of supernaturalism to it. Just like one of those episodes of The Twilight Zone where, like, we're the baddies. That was a meme going around, right? Are we the baddies?
Yeah.
Where it's like something's happening and you're looking at it and you're like, yeah, this is pretty horrific, and a lot of people are benefiting for it and partaking in it, who claim that they've got the best interests of the nation at heart, which is absolutely just such a horrific way of looking at it. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that book is about?
Sure. So in writing the historical horror novels, like you said, there've been 2 so far, The Hunger and the Deep. And the main thing that I noticed after writing them is I would look back at the historical period and see, what were the drivers, what were the key issues at the time that made these disasters possible, right? So like The Hunger was about the westward expansion, it was the very beginning of the settlers going across the nation on the Oregon Trail. And that was driven by a belief that white Americans, had this God-given right to own all the land between the two
Manifest destiny, right? That was
Manifest destiny.
Manifest destiny.
Right. And that ended up causing a lot of problems for the nation down the road. And also part of that too was a huge difference in religious beliefs. The Mormons were kind of growing as an order, and was causing even a lot of dissent and disruption within their own ranks, but between them and other religious groups in America. So that was the kind of thing I was looking for. And after you do a couple of these books, you kind of notice there's a pattern where we haven't solved certain problems, and then they come back and they re-erupt in modern times, because all the things I was seeing in those books, I was seeing happening, in present day. The next book has to do with World War II and the internment of Japanese and Japanese Americans in the camps, which when I was younger, we learned a little bit more about. But also I learned more about it because I am Japanese American, and my husband, who is also Japanese American, his whole family was interned. They were interned at Topaz. And so we learned a lot about it, right? And there are great documentaries out there if people are interested in learning a bit more about that period. But as I was writing the book and I saw the things that had happened historically, and it was shocking to see how incredibly, it was exactly what we're going through in this time, white nationalist groups forming and driving out the Japanese and the Chinese, a lot of Asians, went on for a period of decades before the war even. Just the same things that were happening today were happening then. The same excuses for why they wanted to oppress people are being given today and the other thing I should bring up is that when I was at CIA, I did study genocides and mass atrocities for a long time. That was one of my areas of analysis. And, so I've watched this same kind of thing that America is going through right now happen in these other countries, seeing the same techniques being used to manipulate populations. And it's really just scary and appalling to see what's happening in this country. So that's what the next book, which is The Fervor, is trying to address. So it's a little different from the previous two books. It's probably a little bit more political. It's a little bit more strong. Some people of my other readers are maybe going to be not happy with it, but we'll just have to see, right?
Yeah, I know I don't think they teach enough about that internment at all in schools, or at least, I'm in my early 40s now, and I certainly know we maybe heard a little bit about it, but it was just as sort of like not a footnote of a footnote when we learned history. And I recall talking to people in my family about it who were around then, and they would come up with things like, well, it was for their own protection.
Well, sadly, it was. There were a lot of incidents of
Really?
violence against Japanese Americans at the time, but there's a lot of other underlying things that happened, or underlying factors that people are just not aware of. So, for instance, there was a huge economic force at play because there were some parties that were upset on the West Coast that the Japanese were starting to make commercial inroads in the farming and agriculture business and all that kind of stuff. And so even before Pearl Harbor, there was a lot of movement to try to restrict their, whether or not they could acquire land or businesses or all that kind of stuff. Just a lot of kind of oppression and pushing back. And I know this because my husband's family suffered in it. So what happened with the war was a lot of them lost their property because it happened so fast. They couldn't be, compensated for loss of property and that kind of thing. There was reparations paid in, I can't remember if it was the 80s or the 70s. It was a very small token amount, really, and nowhere near the amount of money that, families lost. They lost all their belongings. A lot of them never settled back in the original area. They ended up, because they were so afraid of violence. So, there's a lot of these factors that if people don't sort of dig a little on their own, like you said, they're never going to find out about it, because that little one line that's in the history book in school does not cover, all of the things that were roiling under the surface of America at the time.
Of course. No, I'm very much looking forward to reading it. We had Kiku Hughes, who wrote a really nice graphic novel about internment, and I think it was actually called Internment. We had her on the podcast about a year ago. It's a YA graphic novel, and it is almost like semi-fantastical, that she goes back in time when she's visiting San Francisco, where her family used to live. She goes back in time to experience internment the same time as her grandmother did, and it was so well done, and I learned a lot about it from that book. So while it's not horror, but it is in the sense that when you think about how people can dehumanize other people, it's quite horrific. So while we're waiting for yours, that, and of course, George Takei's They Called Us the Enemy.
Yeah.
Are books that, we could read to gear up.
Yeah, I saw the stage production of that story. Is very good.
Oh,
and I don't know if you saw
Allegiance, I think it was
Allegiance.
called.
Yeah.
I wanted to see that so badly.
It was very good. And there was the issue was addressed in a season of The Terror on AMC. I think it was the second season.
It
And
was. I
only
have
got
not gotten to that yet. I have 2 young children at home, so and we were all quarantined together last year. So finding time to watch something like The Terror was not going to happen. But I
Yeah.
can read a lot of horror, which I did.
Yeah. Well, I only saw the first few episodes of that, and I have to say, which was when they were, the lead up and being brought to the camps, and it was all very realistic, much like the stories that my father-in-law told me. Yeah.
Well, Alma Katsu, Red Widow is out. The Deep is out. The Hunger is out, and I know you have a second part to an earlier series coming out, right?
Well, my first 3 books, which are a trilogy, kind of that sort of paranormal romancy, but very, very dark, I have to say, very dark, not for young adult. That's being reissued. I'm super lucky. So after 10 years, the original publisher is reissuing them. So that's The Taker and The Reckoning. And hopefully the 3rd book in the series is supposed to come out too. That's called The Descent, but I don't have a date when that's going to drop yet.
Thank you so much. Please come back anytime.
I'd love to.
And we are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.